got a pretty deep voice. Wasn't always like this. After I had my bone marrow transplant, I inherited this voice from my brother. So, you know, lucky for us. Hopefully you can hear me in the back. And first I want to thank you for taking the time to hear me. I know it's a very busy day, and you've got a lot of really important content to work through, so I really appreciate that. I was born at a very young age. No, I won't go into that depth, but I did want to say this. I was born in Israel, and I grew up in South Africa, and I had the distinct privilege of going on safari quite often. And so I got to see a lot of zebras. And I always thought they were really fast, graceful, slightly smaller versions of horses. And it wasn't until 2004 that I realized that I was also a zebra. And unfortunately, I wasn't fast. Probably good that I didn't have the stripes, but I certainly wasn't sleek. And in 2004, in all seriousness, one day I went to a conference. I was working for Microsoft, and I landed up with debilitating abdominal pain. And those of you who've worked with PNH probably have heard of that before. And I landed up at a hematologist locally here in DC. A couple of days later, actually happened pretty quickly. And then for several months, they were trying to figure out what was going on. You know, they couldn't figure it out. And to be fair, this was one of the top Washington top kind of hematology practices. There were practices of 6 of them. None of them had ever seen a PNH patient before. So, you know, not unusual, right? But that was the case. And they couldn't figure out what it was. At one point, my parents said to me, you know, why don't you go and see our physician, our regular physician? And he's a great doctor, but I was like, I'm seeing a hematologist, you know, what is he going to do that they didn't? Well, it turns out that he decided to ignore my symptoms altogether. Because now my blood counts were getting lower, my hemoglobin in particular, although I was starting to also get a bit of aplastic anemia. But he did an exhaustive physical, and he looked in my eyes, as people do in physicals. I didn't have any symptoms, I didn't know of any issues with my eyes, but he looked. And I remember very clearly when he did that test, you know, in the dark, and he was looking, and he goes, well, I don't know what you have, Tamir, but you are very ill. Not the best way to hear about it, but the bottom line is that he recognized, and he was 65 at the time, and I've got to give him credit, he recognized clots in my eyes, severe abdominal pain. He had heard about this back in medical school, which was a long time ago. And immediately he made that connection. And a while later he called me up to tell me that he had diagnosed me with PNH. He had used the HAMS test. That's another animal that comes into the picture. Well, not really. But the HAMS test was from 1937. But to be fair, flow cytometry was pretty well, not that new, but pretty new, and still, this is a regular physician. He diagnosed me. Then the hematologist learned, okay, I've got PNH. They did the flow cytometry, and to their credit, they immediately said, look, we don't know anything about this, but you live right next to the NIH, and Dr. Neil Young, well, he's one of the top experts in the world in this. So they called, and it was a Thursday they called. By Tuesday, I had an appointment with Dr. Young, which is incredible. I'm very, very lucky. I mean, a lot of people sit with these diagnoses, other patients for, as you know, for years, not knowing what's going on. So here I was, 2 months later, seeing Dr. Young, who confirmed it, did a flow cytometry test, and I think in those days it was still just the CD55 and CD59. I think there's this whole thing with too many proteins, it's not healthy for you. But now they're looking at a lot more of them, so okay. But nonetheless, he confirmed it. And long story short, this is 2004. There wasn't Soliris, there wasn't anything around available. And I had a pretty high clone size, around 86% or so. So he advised that probably good to get a bone marrow transplant. 2 of my brothers flew in from out of the country to get tested quickly. Ironically, the one that lived here was the match. They matched each other. And I had a bone marrow transplant at the NIH under Dr. Child's team in July 2004, and that cured me with the NIH. No, it didn't cure me with the NIH, sorry. I'm very much part of the NIH, it cured me with the PNH. And what was then becoming aplastic anemia. But my story, and here I am 18 years later, alive and well. Do I have issues? Of course I do. I'm turning 50 this year. Who doesn't? You're turning 50 this year, right? But other patients, I've stayed involved. I've stayed involved with patients who have PNH, aplastic anemia, MDS, primarily those, through various Facebook groups or what used to be Yahoo groups. And I'll tell you, it's incredible when patients are first diagnosed with these diseases, how desperate they feel, because a lot of them are seeing hematologists just like the ones that I saw, who are supposed to be the best, but they don't know what to do. And some of those hematologists are as gracious as mine were and say, hey, we're going to refer you to someone. And others are no, like, we're going to take care of you. But they actually don't know the best way of taking care of them necessarily. And so we make it, we being the AMDS, the patients on these forums, on these groups, we make it our number one priority to tell them, go and see a specialist. Go and see a specialist on your disease. And we've got a list, the AMDS has a list. We've got folks, a lot of people talk about their own doctors, say, hey, go and see this person. And to your credit, you don't just say, okay, you come see me, you lose your local hematologist. You welcome people to come, you work with them, you figure out what's going on. Is it one of these? Is it some kind of weird combination of PNH, MDS, and something else, which sometimes remains a mystery, right? And then you continue working with their hematologist locally to help them, which, let's be fair, a lot of doctors just wouldn't want to do that, right? They'd say, look, if I'm taking the case, then I'm taking the case. I'm going to take over. But to your credit, you all not only see them, and then we'll get to the research part in a minute, but you're willing to work with them and their local hematologist, which makes a huge difference, because then they don't have to, they can see you once or twice a year maybe, and they get the help they need. But for urgent stuff, they're working with their local hematologist. The other thing that it does is it educates the local hematologist, so they get to know more about these diseases. So, you know, that's something that I know I can speak on behalf of all the patients here to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing that, for helping us, and also for continuing relentlessly to work on not just newer but better treatments that are more successful, that have fewer side effects, that hopefully lead fewer people down the bone marrow transplant path because it is risky, and focus on improving quality of life and other things as well while you're on these treatments. So we truly, truly appreciate everything you do, and we know that we are zebras after all. And you know, there are a lot of other illnesses that a lot more people have, but you choose to dedicate your lives to these things. And without you, I don't know where all of us would be, but I do know that it would be a far, far worse situation. So with that said, I just want to say on behalf of the patients, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for everything you do. From the research, I know you work very hard hours, to seeing us, to working with local hematologists, and participating in events like this to share knowledge, which is also something that, you know, is commendable on its own, so that we can advance the progress on the research together. So again, thank you very, very much from all of us. Really appreciate it.